Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining the Generation Generosity's CLE on human trafficking this afternoon. We are incredibly lucky to have with us four amazing women, one including our moderator, who will be discussing this really important subject of human trafficking, sex trafficking, and child trafficking, and its prevalence in Houston and in other parts of the country. The first thing I wanted to do is introduce our moderator, Ms. Britney Jackson. Britney is an associate attorney at Paletz law firm and works in its crime survivor cases division. She attended the University of Missouri, Columbia, where she double majored in international business and Spanish. She later graduated with her Juris Doctor from the University of Missouri School of Law. While in law school, Britney clerked for the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Missouri Administrative Hearing Commission, the Indiana Attorney General's Office, and Missouri Legal Aid. She also studied abroad in Cape Town, South Africa, and Tokyo, Japan, to broaden her knowledge in international human rights law and East-West negotiation, respectively. Britney is heavily involved with human trafficking awareness, not only in Houston, but around the country. And we're so grateful to her for being able to moderate this really great and important discussion. So Britney, whenever you're ready, you can take it away. And thanks.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I forgot all of that stuff about myself because I feel like decades since I graduated law school. It is my pleasure to be here today and to talk about this very important topic. We are in Houston, one of the largest cities in the country and the world for human trafficking. And so it is very important that, especially us in the legal industry, understand this topic and can be on the lookout for the signs and signals of a person who may need our help and how we can best offer our services to these people, this demographic. We're going to use the term survivors during this webinar. We understand that there are a lot of different terms that can be used to describe these amazing people who have gone through such a traumatic experience and come out of the other side, hopefully with help from people like us, but we'll be calling them survivors throughout this webinar. Terminology is very important, and that's one of the things that we'll be discussing. Just a little bit of information about what I do here at Paletz Law Firm. I am a civil litigator, but I like to call what we do here civil prosecution. I am a former Harris County District Attorney, and so my background is actually in criminal law. So when I came to the private sector and found that there's a venue by which to support survivors civilly, I was very, very excited. And so not only can we prosecute under the federal statute, but we also have a special statute here in Texas, Chapter 98 of the Texas Civil Remedies and Practice Code. And that gives us the opportunity to hold third-party entities who are involved in a trafficking business or endeavor that knowingly benefit from that enterprise to be held civilly liable. So layman's terms, we get to sue hotels, we get to sue massage parlors, we get to sue brothels. There's a term, cantinas, it just came to me. Any enterprise that knowingly benefits from a trafficking enterprise can be held civilly liable. And so it is my pleasure to be able to do that on behalf of survivors here at Paletz. Allowing me to do that here is the managing partner of the firm. His name is Derek Potts. And when I was first hired on, coincidentally, I came here to practice commercial litigation. But when he told me that he had a case representing a young woman here in Houston, a minor, for what happened to her, she was trafficked throughout a number of hotels in the inner loop on Westheimer. It's happening right in front of our faces. When he told me that he was representing this young girl, I said, listen, I'll do the commercial litigation docket as well, but I have to be on this case because of my passion for just supporting victims and survivors and helping them to champion their cause and regain control of their life. And ever since I worked on that case, I've just been a fish in water in this particular practice area. And so that is how I met Miss Amanda Paletz. Amanda is the legal director for the Joseph Project, which is a national organization that represents survivors, and their biggest tenet is to help survivors gain access to legal representation in a myriad of different practice areas: criminal, civil, family law, immigration. So I met Amanda actually in a webinar just like this and contacted her and the other founders of the organization in order to get involved. And so without further ado, I'm going to allow all of our presenters to introduce themselves. I just wanted to segue into kind of how I got into the practice area. So without further ado, Ms. Paletz, if you want to go next.
Sure. Thank you, Brittany. And I would just say that it's been an honor and pleasure to work with you on behalf of survivors. We've referred Brittany several survivors, and she has represented them and just knocked it out of the park each time. So she's a huge asset that we have here at the Joseph Project. My name is Amanda Paletz. As she said, I am the legal director of the Joseph Project. We are a not-for-profit organization. We've been around since 2018. Our prime location is here in Metro Detroit, but we've also expanded to 17 states, and we have quite a presence in the Houston area because, as Brittany said, of how great the need is there for legal services for trafficking survivors. My job here, I'm also an attorney. I've been practicing for 20 years in the areas of criminal defense and family law. I started as a volunteer with the project and then transitioned into my role now. My job here is to connect human trafficking survivors with attorneys who are willing to represent them pro bono. The need is great. There's such a wide variety of legal needs from survivors that we see, anything from criminal matters, family law, immigration, cleaning up their credit, expunging things off their record, having their names legally changed to avoid their traffickers finding them, seeking compensation from crime victims' rights funds. I mean, it really runs a gamut. As you will see from the conversation that we're about to have, the legal needs are vast. So it's my honor to be part of this webinar and to answer any questions that I can from my perspective as somebody who works with survivors every day to try to address their legal needs.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Amanda. And just to save on time, I could say so many things about the Children's Assessment Center. While I was an assistant district attorney, I worked in adult sex crimes, but after Harvey, we had to actually do a stint in the Children's Assessment Center, affectionately called the CAC. So I actually got to work in this building with these amazing people. And Ms. Kerry Mccracken, she is a director there now. She's also an attorney, and I'll let her introduce herself at this time.
Thank you. And thank you for that warm introduction. So my name is Kerry Mccracken. I'm the executive director at the Children's Assessment Center. So as stated, I've been an attorney for over 25 years. I too did 4 years at the Harris County District Attorney's Office, but I spent the rest of my career doing criminal defense. And a lot of people say, well, that's an odd leap to go from defending to participating or to working at the Children's Assessment Center. And it's important to note the Children's Assessment Center is actually neutral. We do our work with 57 partner agencies, and some of our partners, their role is investigation, prosecution, just like one of our partners is CPS, and their role is to determine if a child is safe in their home. But our role is the treatment and healing of the children, so that mental health piece. And our other role is the facilitation of getting everybody together. But back to the odd transition from criminal defense lawyer to executive director here. When I was a criminal defense lawyer, so many of my clients had gone the path, their lives had gone the path that it did because of victimization of some kind. So they were childhood trauma victims, and that trauma was never resolved. So there would be many times when I was talking to a client saying, you know what, you're not a great candidate for probation, but I really want to quit the revolving door of jail and ask the judge, you know, I'm sorry to get personal with you, but I need to know a little background. And so many times they would say, I was a victim of sexual abuse. And I would say, did you ever get any treatment for that? No, I did not. So we all know that childhood trauma untreated can lead to mental health, drug addiction, suicide, poverty, many, many unfortunate things. So that's how I understood the need for trauma victims to get help. And that's what we do here at the CAC. And as you can imagine, some of our victims of child sexual abuse are victims of human trafficking. So that's kind of the nexus with our discussion here today. But appreciate you having me here today. And I appreciate the Houston Young Lawyers Association bringing attention to this issue to a new group of people. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Kerry. Thank you. And last but not least, I'd like to introduce Professor Rosemary Vega. She teaches at the University of Houston Law Center. And I actually just finished my master's in tax law at the Law Center in 2019. It's an amazing school. They're building a new facility. They have a bunch of different clinics that you can participate in as a student to get you ready to actually delve into practice when you finish law school, as opposed to going in with theory only. And so I'll let Professor Vega talk about her clinic.
Thank you, Britney. Thank you all for having me. I've been a practicing attorney for just over 20 years, and mainly my focus was immigration law. So we're here at the university, I'm in their immigration clinic. And so yes, we basically prepare students to go out and start practicing once they're a licensed attorney. We do primarily immigration law, and I do quite, not too much, but enough human trafficking cases. That's, when I was a young attorney, I started at YMCA International a few years after I became a licensed attorney. And so they had a big human trafficking grant. I think they still have that grant. And that's kind of how I started with my expertise in human trafficking. So.
Wonderful. So I think we have enough knowledge of the industry to begin our discussion. I think we've already talked about kind of the core objectives of each represented organization. So let's start with the definition of human trafficking and the different types of human trafficking.
The Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000 defines it as following: a sex trafficking in which a commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion. And those three words are really important. We'll come back to that. In which the person is induced to perform such acts and has not attained the age of 18 years of age, or the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining a person for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of subjection to involuntary servitude, debt, bondage, or slavery. So that's the definition taken from USC section 7102, subsection 9. And I think it's a pretty comprehensive definition of what human trafficking is and what I define it as here at the Joseph Project, and probably what other people on the panel would agree to as well.
Professor Vega, did you want to talk about kind of how the different kinds of trafficking use that same definition, not just sex trafficking, but other forms?
Yeah, so you have sex trafficking of adults, you have sex trafficking of children, you have labor trafficking, which can be adults or children as well. And then you also have what I call, it's kind of like organ trafficking. And it is literally being coerced, defrauded, forced to give up an organ. Usually it's the kidney. And so that's another form of trafficking.
Yes, and all for financial benefit, usually to something or someone.
And I would just add one more thing. A lot of people, I think, assume that trafficking involves taking somebody from, across state lines or bringing them from another country. And that is part of human trafficking, but the vast majority of the trafficking survivors that we work with here are not transported across state lines. They're trafficked in their own neighborhoods, in their own communities. Sometimes they were recruited online, groomed online, or introduced to somebody through a mutual friend or acquaintance. So the idea that it has to be moving people across jurisdictions is not part of the definition of human trafficking.
And Amanda, if I can add something, we often think of traffickers as being strangers or somebody that abducted or lured off the internet, at the mall, however. But in reality, traffickers can be parents, siblings, neighbors, cousins, spouses. domestic partners. So they come in all different forms as well. They can be men or women. Another thing, people always think of men.
Yeah.
Can be anybody.
Exactly. Yes.
And
that's-
I wanted to mention one other thing, that trafficking survivors can be, doesn't look at race, it doesn't look at socioeconomic class, it doesn't look at anything. It could be anyone. And I mean, literally anyone.
That's a great segue into the next question. So who actually is at risk for being a victim of human trafficking?
Just like the professor said, anyone. We have clients that have come from, very dysfunctional backgrounds. They may have had abusive parents. They may have been in a foster situation that was not good for them, that we see a lot. We also see survivors that come from what are considered, well-to-do families, and are very successful in all areas of their life. And they yet have still ended up becoming a trafficking survivor. So anyone unfortunately can be a survivor.
Professor Vega, just generally in the area of immigration, how do you feel about these remarks and with regard to immigration?
Yeah, human trafficking, I see it quite a bit, and it can be anyone, literally anyone. I mean, in the immigration realm, you do see it as more often you see someone being coerced into coming into the United States for a good job, usually is what it is. It's your typical scenario would be someone saying, oh, we know that there's a really good job I can offer you. It's being a waitress in, let's say, Houston, making $15 an hour, all of this stuff. And they're like, well, that's what I definitely need, because I've got, a family to take care of here, whether they're in Honduras or Nigeria, it doesn't matter. It could be anywhere, right? And so that's what we see. We see kind of that coercion, and then they get here and then they're forced into usually prostitution is what we see, or some sort of forced labor. Yeah.
So what are some indicators or red flags that signify the possibility of human trafficking that someone may be in danger or being forced or coerced to be doing what they're doing when, a lay person observes them?
I think whether we're talking about trafficking or even just any kind of child abuse, one thing that if somebody is giving, let's just say a 15-year-old inappropriate gifts like Louis Vuitton purse or a new cell phone or something like that, that's what grooming looks like. So one of the things to keep your eye out for that might happen is grooming. Another thing, if you have a teenager or a child that spends a lot of time on their electronics, you walk in the room and they're putting it down, and none of us, I think, want to be alarmists. That just could mean that they're flirting with that, boy at school. It doesn't mean that it's trafficking, but that absolutely could be a sign that they're chatting with somebody that they don't need to chat with. A child that changes their habits noticeably can be a victim. If they change grooming habits, like they don't groom as much as they used to, or they all of a sudden are hypersexualized, they start dressing in a different manner, that's something that might be a sign that child's being trafficked or abused. Just change in habits is always something that indicates, out in the public, if you see a person, and again, I wanted to say young lady, but it happens to young men as well, and that's an important point, that is just noticeably, you see an adult and a younger person, and the person's hanging their head, won't make eye contact, something like that could be a sign that person is being trafficked. An example I like to give is we actually had a story, or I had heard a story about somebody that was a clerk at a hotel that had a man and a woman come in, a young lady come in, and she was, again, acting, wouldn't make eye contact, kind of stayed behind, wasn't allowed to speak, didn't have her own belongings. And they thought that was unusual and made a report to law enforcement. And they actually did intercept a trafficking victim.
Another thing that I want to point out is maybe working long hours. You know, if you have a client or you know someone who, oh, let's get together, or can you come into the office, and they're constantly saying, I just can't, I work from 8 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night. That could be a flag. You know, you may want to ask them, are you getting paid? How much are you getting paid? And they may say, oh, well, I'm getting paid. Okay, well, how much are you getting paid? You know, sometimes it's very minimal. It's not even minimum wage. Sometimes it's $2 an hour. So, yeah.
A lot of us have the idea that, you know, when it comes to human trafficking of any kind, these people are locked in cellars, you know, chained to the wall. And is that really realistic of how human trafficking looks?
In many cases, it's not. And you know, Britney, I appreciated your point early on, is that one of the things I think all of us on this call have learned is that the language, the vocabulary is different than what we thought before. And you said survivors versus victims. A lot of what we've learned is that we may recover someone from the trafficking lifestyle, and they don't want to be recovered because they don't think of themselves as is in the life. So let's just say your trafficker is your boyfriend. Yes, you are free to go to the store. You're free to do things, you know, outside of the relationship, but because you don't even deem yourself as being trafficked, you wouldn't report. And then another thing that I've learned is a lot of people that are being trafficked feel like they're better off in that situation than the situation they left. So if you left a situation where your parents were abusing you, your father was abusing you, or maybe there was no food for the family or something like that, and you've left that situation, and your new boyfriend or your new circumstance, you're fed, you're clothed, there is a perception sometimes that you're in a better lifestyle.
I agree with that. And I'll just add, you know, I've heard this phrase from many survivors that I've worked with, and they talk about, in hindsight, they'll characterize their trafficker as what they call a Romeo pimp. And I'd never heard that phrase before. And what that means is it's someone that they thought cared about them, that presented as a significant other. I want to take care of you. I love you. But I need you to do these certain things so we can make money. It's just going to be for a little while. And before you know it, this person is completely entrenched in this life. And the option of walking away is not that simple. The trafficker will have their ID. They will have their birth certificate or their social security, whatever identification that they have with them, they will take that. And so leaving, you don't leave with anything. You don't even have an ID to rent a hotel room. So it's not as simple as they want to be in that situation. They clearly don't, but they go into it thinking the person cares about them. And will even sometimes after they're out of the situation, will still refer to their trafficker as their ex-boyfriend, which is a very interesting dynamic.
And there's a lot of manipulation and I would hate to say brainwashing going on. And I think we've all heard horrible stories where the trafficker said, oh, I'm so sorry, your mom died. So if that was your next of kin or your family contact, and you think that person's not even out there anymore, it's just a lot of manipulation and lying and deceit, and just like the definition, coercion.
Yeah, and I wanted to point out with some of the immigrants in the immigrant community, what I have seen is the predators will usually say, we know where your family is, we know where they live, and it's basically threatening the family to make sure that that survivor stays with them, that person stays with them, and they have that psychological control over the person.
Yes, I'd like to think of them as elements of either abduction or seduction. Yep. The force, the fraud, the coercion, they're mixed up into those two different terms in my mind. Is that I'm either forcing you. Amanda noted the definition of Romeo pimp. There are two other ones. the CEO pimp, and the gorilla pimp. And so the gorilla pimp is just like it sounds. They actually use physical violence to control the person and threat of death or serious bodily injury to them or their family member. And you have the CEO pimp that is a psychological coercion where, you know, we're all in this together. This is a business. We're partners. You know, you make this thing work. Without you, we're nothing. So be a team player and go and have, you know, sex with these people to bring the money in, or go and work here, you know, for pennies on the dollar and bring all of the money back to me. And then there's this illusion that one day you're going to share in this financial benefit, but it usually never happens for the survivor.
Right. One other thing that I wanted to point out is many times, and this is something that I have seen, is that the perpetrators will usually use drugs. And so that's another way to keep, because the perpetrators see these people as not as people, but as property, right? And so it's a way to keep their property with them. So it's the use of drugs, they get them addicted. And so I think Amanda had some.
Yeah, we see a lot of that, what, you know, falls under the coercion. So Brittany was just talking about, you know, there's force, there's fraud, or there's coercion. Any three of those mechanisms can result in trafficking. And the force is self-explanatory, the fraud, self-explanatory. The coercion comes in with some of the things Brittany was talking about, the CEO pimp, and also drug-based coercion, which is a huge problem. Either the survivors already have a drug problem or substance abuse problem, and then they are not provided drugs, so they go into withdrawal until they do what the trafficker wants them to do. Or in other situations, they are purposefully hooked on drugs by the trafficker, and then the drugs are withheld. So in order to avoid withdrawal, they then will, they are coerced based on their drug addiction to engage in sex acts, or in some cases, labor trafficking as well.
One last thing, or another thing I'd like to mention that we haven't talked about so far, is that the average age of victims entering trafficking is 11 to 14. So that right there, you know, that's just an imbalance of power, because you are dealing with children many of the times.
Yes, and their vulnerabilities are targeted. Whatever need the trafficker can take advantage of, they will do so, and they're good at it. They're very intelligent, very coercive and persuasive people by their very nature. So moving on to the legal mechanics of human trafficking and how we can help. What legal needs might victims of human trafficking have?
Here at the project, the three top buckets or areas of need that we see is criminal. A lot of the survivors have prostitution charges, solicitation charges on their record that need to be handled, or they're trying to have things removed from their criminal record. We also see a lot of family law issues, custody. Perhaps a survivor has lost custody of their children and they're trying to regain visitation or custody. We see immigration issues. We see people that want to have their, like I said earlier, their names changed legally, obtain new social security numbers. And they're that afraid, understandably so, of their trafficker finding them. We see people that have credit problems. Their trafficker has used their name to open accounts, and now their credit has been destroyed. So we work to rebuild their credit. You know, it really runs a wide range of needs, I would say, but the three that we see the most are the criminal, the family law, and the immigration.
Did anyone else want to speak? I think that Amanda's point is really well taken and well put. And I would call those the emergency services that are needed once they are restored or recovered from the life. And we're using another term there, in quotes, the life is the duration of time that they were actually being forced to involve themselves in human trafficking. I like to think of my legal services here at Paletz as a last resort, that final door that you open to, you know, your own chance at financial freedom and regaining a sense of purpose and accountability for the other entities that involve themselves in the enterprise. But cleaning up that criminal record, getting that child visitation, getting divorced from your former trafficker if he was your husband, those are all the needs that I think are on the front line of it. And I think the Joseph Project does a really good job of meeting those emergency needs right out of the gate. Kerry or Rosemary, anything before we move on to the next question?
I will just applaud the work that all of you do, but Amanda, it's so important that, reclaiming your life, it's a long road, and going back to work and renting an apartment and things like that, having a criminal record is a barrier to all of those things. And having a criminal record for prostitution, drugs, trespassing, the things that come from that lifestyle, it's hard to get past that. And so what we are seeing is more states looking into ways to help expunge those types of records. We're not there totally, but we've made some progress in that regard. So that's the kind of thing moving forward that I think our legislators can do to help survivors.
I agree wholeheartedly, Kerry. Those needs are, like I said, the emergency services that they need to get back on their feet. And then even before, I think we discussed, even before we can get them, the help they need to clear up their criminal record, we need to get them shelter. We need to get them clothing. They may need a ride to court. They may need help going to the Social Security Administration to recover their social security number. All of these things that, the average Joe takes for granted. These people, this demographic, they need that help more than anything when they are recovered.
And just to add to that, I will share a brief real world example of how much attorneys can positively impact on survivors and helping them transition from exploitation to being empowered. We sent a case to Britney probably about a year ago now, and what we thought it was some relatively minor traffic misdemeanors that needed to be cleared from a survivor's record. Britney did an amazing job, handled all of that, but then actually took the time to go deeper with the survivor to find out what was going on with her. And she was actually living with a relative of her trafficker, which was clearly with her young daughter, which was clearly an untenable situation. And when Britney found that out, she kind of started asking questions and found out that the survivor actually had a voucher from the Texas Attorney General's office for survivors that she could use for her rent. I think it was up to 6 months worth of rent. And she was trying to find an apartment, but none of the apartment complexes would really understood what the voucher was. They wouldn't give her the time of day. Britney was able to connect her with somebody in the real estate world and kind of shepherd that situation through. And now she has her own apartment with her little girl. And her life is 100 times improved from where it was when she met Britney. And, that just was initially just a couple of traffic tickets. So when you start to talk with survivors, when you start to kind of get the full picture, you can see what the needs are. And as attorneys, we're in a unique position to help with those things. Had she not had Britney there to help her with the rental situation, I don't know that anyone would have taken the voucher, which is crazy because it was like $2,000 worth of rent or something like that. And just because nobody had seen it, they didn't know what it was, they just said no to her. So having an advocate for these survivors is huge, and the positive effect that attorneys can bring, as someone that's volunteered and worked with survivors, represented them, as well as helped connect them with people like Britney. It's just an amazing feeling to be able to do something which really doesn't take a lot of effort on our part, but can absolutely transform somebody's life.
And it's a rewarding experience for the advocate as well. And what's so great about all of the organizations that we work with is that we have a running list of not-for-profits and other organizations that are there waiting in the wings to supply these resources. But it just takes someone like us with the knowledge of this list to point them in that direction. And so that's why at the close of this webinar, if anyone has any time to volunteer with any of these organizations, we'd love to exchange contact information and help you to help us to help them.
Absolutely.
I'm going to move on to another question here. Do we want to speak to the intersectionality of human trafficking with the different demographics that we routinely see in the system? It's unfortunate that, as we said, minority people and oppressed people and people from underdeveloped countries, or I don't want to say typical, but we've seen a large number of them involved in this kind of issue. But is there a unique challenge of immigrant trafficked persons who are seeking legal protection and relief?
As far as like the immigration is concerned, we see a lot of, what I see a lot of is from Central America, right? El Salvador, Honduras, and many of those people are in a vulnerable situation. Sometimes their government is in political strife, or they don't really trust their authorities there. So, and they're in a very vulnerable situation, a lot of poverty. And so, we do see that. And so the predators tend to prey on that vulnerability, right? And give them promises of a wonderful life in the United States. You can send money back to your family to care for them. You're going to be in a better situation. You're going to either be working as a maid or a nanny or working in a restaurant, all sorts of things that I've heard. They get here, and what happens is they're either put in some sort of prostitution ring, or it's a day labor situation where it is, they have a place to sleep in that place, that home, but they're working 24 hours a day and either not getting paid at all or getting very little pay, not enough to send money back home. And they're basically told, oh, by the way, you've got to pay back the debt of coming to the United States. And that debt just increases and increases and increases, not only because of interest, but, oh, you got to pay for your lodging, even though it's a blanket on the floor in the corner. You've got to pay for the food, even though they're getting nothing, and oh, by the way, that the interest rate just got higher or something else. So they're never out of the debt bondage. So that is part of all of this that is going on. And so they have that feeling of, oh my God, what have I just gotten myself into? They don't have any communication with their family back home usually. The predators are usually telling them, I know where your family is, so you better keep doing what you're doing. So it's a really, really tough situation for them. And so once they are rescued, so to speak, they come out and they don't know sometimes they don't know really where they are. They don't know who to turn to. They don't know who they can trust. So it's really hard for them to even talk to anyone about what they've just gone through. They definitely need counseling. They need housing. They need clothes. They need a number of things. And then you have the layer of immigration. I'm not in this country legally. What am I going to do? And luckily there is something in the immigration realm called the T visa. So they can apply for a T visa. However, they have to report the trafficking and they have to cooperate with law enforcement. And that could mean testifying against their predator, against the trafficker. That's really scary for them. That's terrifying to them. They have to tell their whole story. That's basically re-traumatizing them all over again. So they're in a really tough situation. But patience and just keep talking to them. That's what I've done in the past is just, meet with them as much as possible. They get to trust you and they start talking and talking and talking. And then they'll say, okay, I'm ready. And sometimes it takes months. Sometimes it could take a year, 2 years, sometimes a little longer. It's just at what their pace is.
I think that's a great segue into talking about our intake processes and making sure that they're trauma informed and being able to deal with this demographic and speak to them where they are, not over their head and definitely not below them, because they are just as shrewd, sometimes if not more, than their traffickers, and they can read you like a book. And if they don't feel the genuineness or the sincerity from you as a legal advocate, or what we at the Joseph Project like to call an alongside-er, a therapist, a counselor, someone providing support other than legal advocacy, they won't trust you and you won't get a word out of them. And I've seen it so many times where someone that is in desperate need of help will not receive it because they don't trust the person who's trying to offer it to them. So having a trauma-informed intake process is very important, and I'll let my esteemed panelists speak to that.
Well,
So-
I'll jump in. Sorry. I'll make it brief because I think this is a better question for you two. But at the Children's Assessment Center, we, of course, all of our therapists, forensic interviewers, advocates are all trauma informed. But what we did in this last year is we had all the staff become trauma informed, because you used the word intake. And for us and for all of us, that very first contact that a family makes when they walk through our doors, that healing or resistance starts right there. So we wanted to make sure that the receptionist that greets them has a smile. And I tell my people, if you had a flat tire on the way to work, shake it off and come on in there, because they're having a worse day than you are. So, you know, we've trained them smile if someone's, they're having their worst day. They're coming to our center because their child has been sexually abused. So if they're a little impatient, if our appointment's running a little long and they get a little frustrated, you really have to be compassionate, give them grace and understanding. And that is kind of the principle of trauma-informed care, is, like you said, meet them where they're at, but really have an understanding that they've been through something very traumatic. And so I think it's important, whatever our relationship is with them, to make sure that everyone on your staff and everyone that comes in contact has that same understanding that this is a very traumatic time for, like I said, families of sexually abused children or individuals that are leaving or trying to leave the life of trafficking.
Agreed. And I would just add something to what Britney said, which is the trauma-informed piece is very important. And there's tons of resources out there about that topic. But I would say that what I've learned in working with survivors and dealing with the issues that they present with is, you know, that they don't want to be, you know, to treat them with the way that you would treat anyone else, you know, with respect. They don't need to be, like Britney said, talked down to. You don't need to you know, over explain. They are just as capable, you know, goes without saying, as anyone else, and you don't have to you know, treat them with kid gloves necessarily. And what I've learned from working with them is, when they're talking with me and they're going through their history or some issues that they're having, I'll just say to them, are you venting to me or do you want my feedback? To automatically assume that they want your feedback and they want your advice and is I think kind of insulting. Sometimes they just want to be heard, which is, you know, an expression that's overused but accurate. So when they're telling me things, I will always say to them, you know, are you just good old fashioned venting? Because I don't want to assume that I can fix every problem that you have, and I don't, you know, ever want to feel that I'm being condescending in any way. So, and usually they'll say I'm venting. That's fine, vent away. But if they are seeking feedback, then I will do everything I can to help. But not assuming that you have all the answers and you can fix all their problems, I think is a huge part of it.
I completely agree with both Kerry and Amanda. And, you know, with us and with dealing with the immigration, we do have to have them write their affidavit, their story, and basically it's re-traumatizing and telling their story all over again, not only once, but probably many times over. So we do utilize counselors to help them get through and talk through a lot of their story, and it helps tremendously.
I think that is part of the nuts and bolts of running any legal services office, you know, even outside of human trafficking, but definitely in the area of human trafficking, having counselors and therapists on staff, or, you know, even outsourcing it, but just having those people close whenever you have a, maybe even an emergency situation is very, very helpful. We recommend it. So child trafficking and child abuse and neglect. Could you address how the history of, you know, past abuse or family instability or poverty or homelessness just adds to and makes a child more susceptible to being exploited through trafficking?
Well, certainly there are patterns of child abuse in the family. Many of our child abuse victims, they are more vulnerable to human trafficking. A lot of it's just patterns. If you've grown up in a family of violence, you think that's normal. Certainly, we've talked about reasons that people are vulnerable to trafficking. And one of those, if you're hungry, if you're poverty, and then your trafficker fills that gap for you, it certainly makes you more vulnerable as well. If you grow up in an environment where you are not valued, I can't say it any better, not valued, your self-esteem is very, very low because you don't have any support, and you all of a sudden meet somebody that gives you that value and that support, tells you you're pretty, tells you you're smart, whatever it is. And back to the CEO pimp, you have a role that gives you value, and you're vulnerable.
For the children that come to the CAC that may have an intersection with human trafficking or child trafficking, Kerry, are we talking about runaways here? Are we actually talking about Amber Alert children that were abducted? How do you see child trafficking at the CAC?
Just like we said earlier, all of the above. Certainly runaways are really, really, really vulnerable because obviously they're leaving an unpleasant, at least in their mind, leaving an unpleasant situation. They need shelter, they need food. So they're the perfect target, I hate to say. But just like we said at the beginning of the call, everyone is, the traffic victims come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. We see, I heard the most horrible story about a high school girl that was very successful, friends, great parents, everything. One of the guys at school met a pimp that said, I will give you $20 or whatever for every girl's phone number you bring me. This young man probably didn't know what he was involved in, but he would bring this pimp phone numbers and he would start chatting with these girls. And so that's how he recruited what would seem to be an otherwise happy, normal high school sophomore. So, and this was in one of our communities around here. So, like I said, everybody's a potential.
Yes, I actually, I thought you were about to tell this story that came across my desk. There's a young woman in the same situation, very affluent family, athlete, you know, popular at school, and she was actually a victim of revenge porn. And so this person, another athlete, a male, used this video over her head and told her that if you don't continue to do whatever it is that I tell you, everybody's going to see this video, the whole school, your parents, what have you. And that is how she was introduced to the life. So there are just so many ways to get into the life, and they have so many needs once they are recovered from it. How can we go about helping the CAC in the way of volunteering?
Our volunteer program's been a little bit frozen because of COVID, but we're hoping to get that back on very soon. Our volunteers help us get ready for parties for children, and I'm trying to think of something that's specific to trafficking. I don't honestly can't give you good examples of how our volunteers help in that realm, but I will say that through this past year with the pandemic, one of the silver linings is we've really increased our trainings. And January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month. So a good place to start is just to educate yourself. Go to our trainings, somebody else's trainings, learn what you can do, know the signs and symptoms. If you do have children, you know, it's the old adage, you know, talk to your children. And, you know, when people tell me, oh, they're 15, I'm going to have the talk. I'm like, well, that's a little late, So start at, I say start with your little bitties at age 4 or 5, and it's a different conversation. It's just about, body autonomy and safe touch, but keep the conversation going. Obviously, the conversation changes as the child gets older, but equip your children to recognize when something's not right, recognize what grooming is, make them comfortable talking to you if somebody's talked to them in a way that's uncomfortable. That's the best thing I can share with the community. Yes, we would love volunteers. How that directly relates to our trafficking efforts. One program we are just now starting, so it's piloting, so this may be a way in the future, is we are starting a mentorship program with one of the local churches. And so we are mentoring, or we are pairing someone that's kind of at the end of their therapy journey and ready to really embrace their new life, with mentors that help them with some of the things we've talked about. And it's a pilot program, so we're kind of trying to keep a log of what the needs are, so we can have a resource book. But this is where you go to get your driver's license. Oh, you got to get your birth certificate before you get your driver's license, and some of that kind of stuff. Here are the apartment complex that are, affordable. Just this is how you get a GED. So it's in its infancy, but hopefully that will be something that community volunteers could help us with more in the future.
Wonderful. And of course, any and all of us would be willing to help you guys put that together if you need any help at all. We don't have a program yet. Let's start one, and we've got your back. Amanda, how can we help the Joseph Project?
Let me count the ways, right? As many attorneys as we can get. We love to have a deep bench. We always talk about creating like a national guard of attorneys around the country that will step up, raise their hand and say, I will help. We partner with young attorneys. It don't have to be someone that's been practicing 15 years to work with a survivor. You really just have to have the passion and the desire to help. Anything from helping them with a criminal matter, a family law matter, a name change. It really runs a gamut. And we are so fortunate to have, Britney didn't mention this about herself, but she is our legal coordinator for the Joseph Project there in Houston. So you've got, boots on the ground, so to speak, with the project. She's been amazing. And if anyone's interested in working with us as an attorney, volunteering your time, you can reach out to me. I'll put the website in the comments, or you can reach out to Britney and she can plug you right in. The need is great. And I probably get 4 to 5 referrals a week from Texas, specifically from Houston. Department of Justice sends them to us. Redeemed Ministries, Elijah Rising, Rescue America have all been fantastic partners. And like I said, we could not have enough attorneys. So if you're interested, or even just want to learn more about what we do, please reach out to me at the project or to Britney, and we can plug you in.
Yes, and it doesn't take much. Like Amanda said, it can be something as simple as showing up to JP court for them and getting a ticket dismissed, or making a phone call to get that same result. It can be as small as you need it to be to keep going with your full-time job, or if as large as you want it to be, if you want to become a not-for-profit or pro bono attorney and you have the ability to do that. Just as much or as little work as you want to be of service. It really doesn't take much at all. And we're here to support you, like Amanda said, if you need any help. One of my shameless plugs is I actually have a assignment that I need to complete for a survivor right now. I need to draft a non-disclosure motion for the court, where she got her last conviction. It is time for her to get her deferred adjudication off of her record. And for the life of me, I want to get this done. But if you saw the pile that I moved off my desk before the webinar started, it would be great if we can get a team of us kids together to get these drafts into a database that we can just send each other when we have a case come up.
That would be a game changer, because there are so many survivors in your area that want their records sealed or non-disclosed or expunged, however you guys say it in Texas. I get those calls every week. So.
I might just need to tap into the defense bar as well, because I know someone has one to give me and I just need to ask. But I do not want to forget about Professor Vega. Of course, she's at the clinic at U of H. And so no one can really volunteer with the clinic, but there are opportunities for law students that want to help this demographic as well with Professor Vega.
Yeah, we don't accept volunteers. The students register for our class. However, if you want to get involved with the immigration side of human trafficking, I would recommend YMCA International. I believe they have the grant for human trafficking through DOJ. Catholic Charities, they deal with a lot of children issues. And any other nonprofit that deals with immigration, such as Tahirih Justice Center as well, they do a really wonderful job. So, and then there's a fairly new nonprofit in Houston called Galveston Houston Immigrant Representation Project. So they're also a very good resource.
Awesome. Well, we are at 12:56. I think we knocked this thing out of the park, ladies. We are right at the tip. We're at 1 o'clock. Thank you all so much for taking time to do this, and I'll turn it back over to Ms. Akpan. Thank you, everyone, for joining in.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
This was so incredible. You four ladies are just so inspirational, and I'm real on behalf of the organization. I know we've been saying thank you a lot, but I think during these times that continue to be very challenging for all of us, it's really good to know that there are people like y'all out there in the trenches doing this work for these survivors whose conditions have certainly been amplified due to the pandemic. So thank you all for your inspiring work, for letting us know how we can support you. And for all of you that attended, I also want to say thank you to you, because it shows your interest in this area. And as we heard from these four amazing ladies, there's a lot of work to be done. And at regardless of where we are in our sort of career, I know we have some law students watching, and then we have some more kind of, sort of seasoned OG attorneys watching too. There's a place for each of us. So the today's CLE course number is in the chat. Our panelists have put their info and website in the chat as well. But if anyone has any questions or wants to, have an introduction to a specific panelist, let Britney or I know, and we'd be happy to make that connection. So thank you all so much. And I hope you all have a great rest of the week. And to our panelists and fabulous moderator, thank you all again. So take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Everybody have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.